I was just removed from LinkedIn again. I was off for 4 years. I was posting science, and they didn't approve of it, and they permanently banned me.
My name is Mike Mauceli, and this is the Energy Show with REI Energy, where we're energizing your investments and maximizing your tax deductions. Today, we're talking about climate thriving. You're going to discover how increased CO2 and warming climates are benefiting humanity, contrary to all of the green rhetoric. My guest today is Gregory Wrightstone. Gregory is a geologist and executive director of the CO2 Coalition. He's also the author of A Very Convenient Warming, How Modest Warming and More CO2 Are Benefiting Humanity, and Inconvenient Facts. Great to have you on the show today, Gregory.
Good to join you. There's certainly a lot of myths and disinformation out there that we can, in the short time we have, well, let's try and dispute and dispel some of that and bring some light of day to the facts and show what's really going on.
Yeah, we were talking a little bit about this before the show, actually, because I actually went through a tornadic event on Monday morning at my home here in Dallas. And of course, over the weekend, there was quite a few tornadoes that come through. And of course, the main thing that, the media and everybody tries to conclude, that, hey, it's all part of climate change, right? And just wanted to kind of get your facts on it because, that seems to be the green push these days.
Well, you have to look at this and step back a bit away from just the recent events and put those recent events into the long-term perspective. And for tornadoes, they're somewhat like hurricanes in that long-term data is somewhat suspect until the Doppler radar came up in the early 1980s, and we built that system out. Now we can capture every tornado that touches down here in the United States. And make no mistake, the United States is by far, it's something like 90+% of all the tornadoes in the world occur here in the United States. And it's because of our unique geography with warm, moist Gulf air that's low, and then it's overridden by cold air coming down out of Canada or over the Rockies. And so you have this unstable warm air underneath cold air, which leads to the beginning of the cyclonic winds. And so we're unique in that perspective. But rising temperatures don't cause more tornadoes. Tornadoes are caused by a differential temperature. In other words, very hot versus very over or below very cold. Warming temperatures actually tend to lessen that. And we see now that the really big tornadoes have definitely been in decline over the last several decades. And in fact, right now, I was just looking last night, we're called the Enhanced Fujita Scale, EFUC, stands for Enhanced Fujita Scale. And it goes from 1 being just a little piker of a tornado, or there's, I don't want to be an any, but if it's EF1, it's not nearly as bad. EF5s are horrific. I mean, these are monster storms. And if you look, since they've been logging this, we've now gone 12 years without an EF5 tornado, which is the longest period since we started gauging these things. And so it's a little bit different. You got to use science, facts, and data to look at what's actually going on now and compare it to the long-term data.
Yeah, I think a lot of the climate change, people, now that you have cell phones and you have all of these video recordings that they can pick and choose all of these events that have been normal events over history, but they pick and choose them, and all of a sudden they throw them out there on the, on the news.
They're very selective. They're
Yeah.
very selective, and they cherry pick. They don't tell the whole story. And one thing, just beware when you hear we're coming up to hurricane season, and what you're going to hear a lot of is that named hurricanes have been increasing. And that's true. They have, because they're naming them earlier. What used to just be a little tropical depression that rose up, got a little stormy, and then went away. Now it has a name. And so look for that. Named hurricanes are increasing, but it's not because hurricanes are increasing. It's because they're naming them at an earlier stage of development. And that's one of the tricks you have to look for. A lot of the giveaways too is scientists say, or or something predicted in the future that X might or may be exaggerated. And what I see as a scientist, it's my job to say, okay, this is what they're telling you, and this is what the facts are. That's my job, and my colleagues here at the CO2 Coalition. We're one of the greatest organizations of scientists in the world. We have Dr. John Clauser, Nobel laureate, sits on our board. Dr. Will Happer is our chairman, emeritus professor from Princeton. We've got Patrick Moore sitting on our board. He was a co-founder of Greenpeace, for crying out loud. And he believes, as I do, and the rest of the members of the CO2 Coalition, that what we're seeing, and that's what my new book is about, A Very Convenient Warming, are the huge benefits that are accruing to humanity from modest warming and more CO2. By almost every metric we look at, our ecosystems are thriving and prospering. Great disasters are decreasing. Natural disasters are decreasing, not increasing. Deaths due to natural disasters are in significant decline, more than 90% decrease since 1900. So what we say is we should celebrate the increase in CO2 because of the wonderful things that are happening to our ecosystems. And then we're benefiting from the increase in plant growth, increase in forests, and particularly agricultural productivity, just breaking records year after year after year, from the coldest nations to the warmest.
Yeah, when did the Green New Deal become so political, I guess, or climate become so political?
It started 1998 or before. What we saw when I was in school in the mid 1970s as a geologist, we've just gone through 33 years of cooling from the mid 1940s up until the late 1970s. We went through 30, and bear in mind, we started adding carbon dioxide, which the alarmists call the demon molecule. We call it the miracle molecule. Just as we started adding lots of CO2 to the atmosphere, the planet went into a cooling trend, a 33-year cooling trend. How do you balance more CO2 and cooling temperatures? Wait a minute, I thought every molecule of CO2 had a warming effect. But apparently that only started in 1978 or 1979.
Yeah, I think it all started back when Al Gore decided he could make money on climate change. And, that seemed to start out the big push of, we're burning up the planet, the oceans are going to boil. And I remember back in the 70s when they had talked then about coming into a new ice age. And then, of course, It was the hole in the ozone layer. And then, of course, in the ozone. And then it was, the oceans are going to boil. And now it's climate change. But isn't it true that climate is changing all throughout history?
Yeah, the only thing unusual and unprecedented would be if it wasn't changing. And I like to look over the last several thousand years. One of the favorite parts that I talk about a lot, people seem to resonate. They love this discussion. And I dive into this in Convenient Warming, is the strong relationship between human history and climate history. And we find that great empires and civilizations rose up during and benefited during these past warming trends. And if we go back, there were 3 previous warming trends prior to the one we're in, and we're in a warming trend. We just are. It's been warming for more than 300 years, though. I'm bouncing around here, but it's important to understand. I was just at Mount Vernon 2 days ago, George Washington's home place, and Martha Washington loved to have ice in her drinks in the summer. And so he built an ice house at Mount Vernon, which I just visited. Every winter, they would go down to the Potomac River, and he'd have his slaves, indentured servants, and some freemen would cut the Potomac River ice, which froze thick solid. They would cut the blocks every single winter and take it up to the ice house. Well, the Potomac doesn't freeze over anymore like that. It just doesn't. So we can use historical data to say it's warmer today than it was back then, which was called the Little Ice Age, which was probably the coldest period in the last 10,000 years. But we can use historical documentation. We can use things we call proxies that estimate temperatures. But we find that the first great civilizations, the Hittites, the Babylonians, the Harappan Empire in the Indus River Valley, China, Egypt, all these great civilizations rose up during a period that was really warm called, it was at the Bronze Age or the Minoan warm period. And then it started getting cold, and it got cold quickly. And we see this repeated time and time again. When it started getting cold, things became horrific. We would see crop failure, famine, pestilence, and mass depopulation. And it didn't start getting better until we got into the next warming period, the Roman warm period, the time of Christ. Again, food was bountiful, life was good. There's a reason the Romans wore togas. It was really warm. And so people prospered. And the previous cold period were called the Greek Dark Ages. And then after the Roman period, we went into the Dark Ages. It was a cold period. And then the medieval warm period was next, with the high Middle Ages, warm, life was good, food was bountiful. So what we're doing is looking through to find that it's just opposite, isn't it, of what we're being told. Fear the heat. It's going to be catastrophic. Crop failure is going to be related to this warming driven by CO2. History doesn't tell us that. History tells us just the opposite. They might call me a science denier, and they do. I would call them history deniers, because they deny what's actually happened in history in terms of temperature and climate. Just opposite of what I say that a lot, is just opposite of what you're being told. And that's a fact.
Well, why are so many people out there saying CO2 is bad then? I mean, that seems to be the
Yeah,
buzzword.
it is. And it's disappointing. When I first got into this, it was my own search for the truth. I'm a geologist, and I spent years in exploration. I was early with the shale gas revolution, wrote the first peer-reviewed comprehensive paper on the Mauceli shale, which is the largest gas field in the world. And so I did that, but then I started getting into this. I started diving into this climate change, and I said, I'm not going to believe anything that anybody tell. I'm going to look at the base data myself and come to my own conclusions. And that's what I did. And frankly, what I found angered me. It angered me terribly, because I found scientists that were frankly lying. They were spreading disinformation. They were cherry picking data, not revealing all of the data, getting rid of the data that didn't fit this climate narrative of catastrophic warming. And that's what that's what drove me to write my first book, which is Inconvenient Facts, which has been very successful. In fact, it was just #1 bestseller on Amazon just a month ago in several categories. And so the new book, though, I take it a step further from, there is no climate crisis, and there isn't. I mean, we've taken this a step farther to say that not only is there no climate crisis, man, ecosystems are thriving and prospering, and we're benefiting greatly. And I call it the greatest untold story of the 21st century, that of a thriving planet, thriving humanity. And it's something we should celebrate, not demonize.
I take it you're not getting any grants from the federal government, right?
Not a bit. But people are responding to our message. I'm really, really, really optimistic about what I found when I talk to people. I find that people are thirsty for this information. And I use, we have a smartphone app that I developed that's free.
Okay, great.
My first, that's great. And I use this when I talk to people on a plane or restaurant or wherever. And we can pull that in for, just search for Inconvenient Facts at Google Play or the App Store. If you
I'll
got
have
an
to get
iPhone.
that. That sounds
Inconvenient
pretty interesting.
Facts. And you can use this to show, okay, well, and I just did a few days ago with my wife, and we're sitting having a cold beer on Memorial Day, and the manager of the place came over, a couple other people, and they would gather around, and they'd never heard this information. They had never heard about warming being good, about CO2 being good. And their eyes, I tell these and I show the information, people's eyes get wide and they go, why aren't they telling us that? Why haven't I heard that? I heard that when I was in the United Kingdom several months ago, and I was on the train. There was a fellow being honored at Oxford for his work in sustainable building in Ghana, and he was big on this climate change, just sustainability. And we started talking, and he got angry. I pulled out my book. I gave him a copy of my book, and he got angry. He says, "Why have I not heard this? Why are they not telling this? Why are they hiding this?" And we hear that they have to silence people like me and my colleagues of the CO2 column. They have to silence us because we present a compelling, fact-based, science-based case that says, no, 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 you're wrong about the climate crisis, and you're exactly opposite. So we're fighting. They have to silence us. If we're allowed to speak in mainstream media, it's game over for them, because the material we use and the science we use is indisputable.
I always say that the climate change is the greatest transfer of wealth in human history, because obviously you got to follow the money if you want to figure out why these ludicrous ideas are pushed out there, right?
Yeah, we got these climate grifters that Michael Mann. They're making huge amounts of money. Or you've got these nations around the world, developing nations. They want to promote this because they've got their hand out saying we need climate reparations for being harmed. For example, the Maldives, the UN, it's supposed to be the most at risk. It's an island chain, a bunch of islands that make up the Maldives. The UN calls it the most at risk islands in the world. And of course, the president and prime minister of the Maldives are, we need climate reparations. We're going to be underwater in a couple of decades. Well, as a geologist, what's fascinating, and you've probably never heard this, 15,000 years ago, the Maldives were just like today, just above sea level. Over the last 15,000 years, sea level has risen 400 feet. 400 feet of sea level rise. And yet here we are with the Maldives just above sea level. How, you might ask, is that possible? And I will tell you, it's a geologic process known as accretion. And you could don't just believe me. Go search on Google, search it out, accretion and sea level, and find out that it's a natural process. During storm events, lots of these sands and gravels got washed up on the island, and they're moved around by various animals and plants, and just but it's a process known as accretion. So these islands grow. So what they're telling you is the last 400 feet of sea level rise didn't put those islands underwater, but the next 3 inches will, which is what it would be by 2050. 3 inches of sea level rise. That's what's maybe to your ankles, and that's going to put them under. They don't. When you look at data like this is the data they have to suppress. They don't want you to know that there's been 400 feet of sea level and these islands are doing just fine. And it's this kind of information that it's very dangerous if it gets out there in the public. So again, they have to sign. I was just removed from LinkedIn again. I was off for 4 years. I was posting science, and they didn't approve of it, and they permanently banned me. So I got back on a few weeks ago using a different Gmail address on LinkedIn, and so I snuck back on, and then I was found out over the weekend, and they said back in 2017 or whatever it was, 2020, I think it was 2021, I think it was, that they banned me permanently. And they said, well, we'll let you back on if you agree to abide by our rules, which mainly means I have to bend the knee to to the claims of the IPCC, climate crisis. I told them to go pound salt. Nope, not going to happen. I'm not going to bend the knee to anybody.
Well, I appreciate that because, they went through this same stuff with COVID, right? If you came out and you actually talked bad against them, or negatively against the government, then, they immediately shut you down. And of course, climate is the same thing. But when you look at countries like China and you look at the biggest polluters in the world, like these huge countries, they don't seem to be slowing down. In fact, they told, the probably the US to go pound sand. I mean, we're going to continue to grow our economy, but yet you got all these greenies out there that are, trying to suppress people in Africa from having, you know, constant electrical power and stuff because they don't want them using their resources like we've done here in the US. I mean, how does that even hold water?
It doesn't. And in fact, we have a research associate named Vijay Jayaraj, originally from Bangalore, southern India, and he writes a lot about this. He calls it climate imperialism, climate colonialism, where the West is telling India and the other developing nations, no, 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 you need to slow down your energy use, even though it's documented very clearly that there's a strong relationship between GDP of nations and energy use. But they don't want India, they don't want China, they don't want Bangladesh, Nepal, the countries of Africa. They want them destined for generational poverty. I won't stand for it, and we write a lot about that. And you say, well, it's not fair, but it goes beyond that. If you look at these people that don't have electricity, and they're destined, they're cooking over wood and dung in their homes, leading to diseases. It's a humanitarian crisis that's enabled and promoted by John Kerry, Greta Thunberg, and the other climate grifters like Michael Mann.
Yeah, it's just ridiculous. So what in the end, what is the goal for all these alarmists?
I don't know. I really, I, I'm, we at the CO2 Coalition stick with the science. We stay out of the politics. It accrues to our benefit for doing that because we're neutral arbiters by just using the science. So I don't know what the motivations of any one person is. I can't see inside men's and women's souls to see what motivates them, but I've heard others talk. Uh, is it destruction of the Western economies? Is it destruction of capitalism? Is it empowering another political philosophy? Others have called it Marxism. I don't know. I don't know what their motivation is, but I can tell you that it'll be very bad for the United States and the citizens of the United States to hamstring ourselves, to intentionally increase energy costs, to make energy from coal, oil, natural gas, and nuclear less abundant, less affordable. It's just going to lead, it's going to accelerate, and it has accelerated the inflation in the United States and around the world. This is intentionally destroying the economies of the Western world. And you just shake your head. I know you do. I do too. And just can't, why do these people not see it? And I think they do see it, but as to what their agenda is, I don't know.
Well, unfortunately, we're seeing it play out right before our eyes, here, and we've got to make some changes. So, but anyway, Gregory, it was great to have you on the show today. Can you tell our listeners how to get a copy of your book?
Yeah, the name is A Very Convenient Warming. If you just search for convenient warming, you'll probably find my website, which is convenientwarming.com, or buy it on Amazon. A lot of people do that, or go to the CO2 Coalition website, co2coalition.org. We have a lot of good information there. We're a fount, and again, we're the tip of the spear when it comes to advancing fact-based science about climate change.
It's great to have you on the show today, and hopefully I can have you back in the future.
Well, let's do it. We need to get this information out there. We've only touched the very the very tip of this. We could go for 5 hours
Yeah.
and have 5 hours more to do. Thank you so
All
much.
right. Thank you. I appreciate it.
This podcast is a presentation of Rich Dad Media Network.